Baby cries loudly when near grandpa. Mom finds out why and calls 911. Ella, a 3-year-old girl, ran around the house with a radiant smile on her face, dragging a blonde-haired doll behind her. Her pure laughter brought a smile to Lucy's face as she prepared dinner in the kitchen. The peaceful scene was abruptly shattered by a cold, deep voice coming from the doorway. "Ella, come here to your grandfather," said Don Edward, her stern grandfather, his piercing gaze fixed on the little girl. Ella immediately stopped laughing, her eyes filled with fear. She backed away, clutching her doll tightly, her voice trembling. "Mom! Mom!" Lucy, hearing her father-in-law's voice, quickly wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out. "Oh, father, you're here. Would you like some tea?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm and conceal the worry in her eyes. "No need. I'm here to see if the girl has made any progress. Children like her need strict discipline, they can't be allowed to grow spoiled," Don Edward said, his tone dry and firm. Lucy glanced at Ella. The little girl's eyes were red, her body trembling. "Ella, go greet your grandfather," she said gently, though her heart felt heavy. Ella shook her head vigorously, tears streaming down her face. "No, I don't want to," she cried, running to cling to the legs of Samuel, her father, who had just emerged from his study. "What's going on?" Samuel asked, looking from his wife to his father. "Your daughter has no manners at all. She needs to be taught," Don Edward said sternly, his gaze full of disapproval. "She's just a child, father. Maybe she needs more time to warm up to you," Samuel replied, trying to defuse the situation. He bent down to pick up Ella, soothing her. "I didn't raise you to be such a weak father," Don Edward snapped, his voice filled with authority. "Back in the day, you learned to stay silent and endure, and now you should teach her the same." Lucy bit her lip, not daring to contradict him, though resentment churned inside her. She carried Ella upstairs, leaving the two men in the living room. Upstairs, Ella sat on her mother's lap, still sniffling. "Grandpa hurt me," she said softly, her tiny hands gripping Lucy's tightly. Lucy froze for a moment but tried to keep her voice steady. "Grandpa loves you, sweetie. I'm sure he didn't mean to hurt you," she said, though a vague unease began to grow in her heart. What did Ella's words mean? Had Don Edward really done something to frighten her? "No, he doesn't love me," Ella said, shaking her head, her voice trembling. "He hurt my hand." Lucy took Ella's small hand and examined it, finding only a few faint red marks. "Did you fall or bump into something?" she asked, but Ella remained silent, her tear-filled eyes staring into the distance. Downstairs, Samuel tried to reason with his father. "Father, maybe we should be gentler with Ella. She's just a little girl. Not everyone is like I was back then." Don Edward let out a dry laugh. "Do you think I was wrong? I raised you to face life head-on. Without my discipline, you wouldn't have achieved what you have today." Samuel fell silent, memories of his childhood flooding back. Long nights spent under strict supervision, harsh scoldings, and even physical punishment for minor mistakes. He vividly recalled the feeling of having his childhood and freedom taken away. "But the cost was too great, father," he said quietly, his voice filled with pain. "I don't want Ella to go through what I did." Don Edward stared at him, his eyes filled with displeasure. "What are you doing with your life, Samuel? Have you forgotten what it means to be a father?" Samuel wanted to argue further, but in the end, he simply sighed and shook his head. He knew no argument would change his father's rigid mindset. That night, Lucy told Samuel what Ella had said. "What do you think father might have done to her?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. "I don't know," Samuel replied, his voice heavy. "But I'll find out. If it's true, I won't let this continue." Lucy nodded, but her heart remained burdened. She knew confronting Don Edward wouldn't be easy, but she would do whatever it took to protect Ella, even if it meant standing up to the most powerful man in the family. That night, the air in the house felt thick with silence and tension. Ella, after crying for a long time, finally fell asleep in Lucy's arms. But her sleep was far from peaceful. She frequently flinched and screamed in her dreams, forcing Samuel to wake up several times during the night to check on her. "Lucy, she's having nightmares again," Samuel said softly, standing at the door of Ella's room. The dim light from the nightlamp revealed his anxious face. Lucy sat by her daughter's bed, gently stroking her soft hair. This time, she mentioned something about her grandfather, she whispered, trying not to wake Ella. "I can't stop thinking about what she said earlier. Samuel, we can't keep ignoring this." Samuel sighed, running a hand through his hair as though trying to dispel his weariness. "I know. But you know how my father is. If we don't have concrete proof, he'll deny everything and accuse us of spoiling her." Lucy didn't reply, but her eyes were filled with determination. She knew staying silent would only make things worse. Ella needed protection, and she was ready to do whatever it took to keep her daughter safe. The next morning, Lucy received a call from Clara, her closest friend. Clara was one of the few people Lucy felt comfortable confiding in about her family problems. "Lucy, you look tired. Is everything okay?" Clara asked, her voice full of concern as they met at a small cafe near Lucy's house. Lucy sighed, stirring the coffee in front of her. "Clara, I don't even know where to start. Lately, Ella has been terrified of her grandfather. She even screams in her sleep, saying he hurt her. I've talked to Samuel about it, but he's hesitant because Don Edward is his father." Clara frowned, placing her hand over Lucy's. "Lucy, you need to do something. If Ella is saying these things, there's a reason. Don't let your respect for him overshadow your instincts as a mother." Lucy nodded, a new resolve forming within her. "I know. But the problem is that Don Edward holds too much power in this family. I need evidence, otherwise, he'll dismiss everything I say." Meanwhile, back at home, Samuel sat in his study, deep in thought about what Lucy had said. He flipped through the family photo album, and images from his childhood surfaced one by one. Each picture seemed to stir painful memories. One photo in particular made Samuel pause longer than usual. It showed him sitting beside his father, his eyes red and swollen from crying, yet forced to smile for the camera. "I was just a child, and he wouldn't forgive even the smallest mistake," he thought bitterly. His eyes began to sting with tears. Memories of being punished for spilling water or not knowing his lessons came rushing back. He didn't want Ella to grow up in the same fear he had endured. The mix of anguish and responsibility weighed heavily on him, pushing Samuel toward a decision. That afternoon, Don Edward visited again. As usual, he entered with an imposing demeanor, his gaze scrutinizing everything around him. Ella immediately shrank back, hiding behind Lucy and clutching her mother's dress tightly. "Ella, come greet your grandfather," Don Edward commanded, his voice full of authority. Lucy knelt down and spoke gently to her daughter. "Ella, I'm here. It's okay." But Ella just shook her head, her eyes red with tears. She didn't even dare to look in her grandfather's direction. "No. I don't want to," she cried, her voice trembling. Don Edward frowned, stepping closer. "This girl needs discipline. Lucy, what are you doing letting your daughter become so spoiled?" Lucy stood up straight, meeting Don Edward's cold gaze. "Father, maybe you should leave her alone. She's still young, there's no need to force her." "Force her?" Don Edward scoffed. "Children like her need to learn obedience. I raised Samuel the same way, and now he's a successful man. Don't think your softness will help her grow." Samuel, who had been standing near the doorway, stepped into the room. "Father, stop. Ella isn't like I was. I don't want her to endure what I did." Don Edward turned sharply, looking at Samuel as if he had just uttered something unthinkable. "Are you saying the way I raised you was wrong?" Without me, you wouldn't be where you are today. Yes, and I thank you for that. But that doesn't mean I have to do the same with my daughter, Samuel replied firmly. Father, I want Ella to grow up in a safe and loving environment. Don Edward was silent, but his eyes burned with anger. So you're opposing me now, aren't you? Samuel, you've really changed. Samuel sighed, but he didn't regret speaking up. He knew this was just the beginning of a battle, but for Ella's sake, he was ready to face whatever came. The atmosphere in the house grew even tenser after the confrontation between Samuel and Don Edward. Ella continued to refuse to leave her mother's side whenever her grandfather was around. Her nightmares became more frequent, and Lucy found it increasingly difficult to ignore the troubling signs. One morning, while Ella was playing with a set of puzzle pieces, Lucy noticed red marks on her wrist. They looked like the imprint of someone gripping her too tightly, leaving faint lines. Ella, what happened here? Lucy asked, trying to keep her tone calm. Ella flinched and pulled her hand away. Nothing, Mommy, she said, avoiding eye contact. Lucy didn't press her, but her heart felt heavy. After Ella went down for her nap, Lucy brought it up to Samuel. I noticed some red marks on Ella's wrist this morning. What do you think could have caused them? Lucy asked, her voice low to avoid being overheard by Ella. Samuel leaned back on the sofa, rubbing his temples. Maybe she was playing rough with something. Don't overthink it, Lucy. Don't you think this is alarming? Lucy asked, unable to hide the frustration in her voice. Our daughter is increasingly terrified of her grandfather, she's having constant nightmares, and now there are strange marks on her wrist. I don't believe this is a coincidence. Samuel remained silent for a moment, then sighed. I'll keep a closer eye on things, but you know my father. He never admits when he's wrong. If we don't have concrete proof, confronting him will only make him angrier. Lucy pressed her lips together, knowing Samuel was right. Don Edward was a powerful and stubborn man who had never acknowledged his mistakes. But regardless of the challenges, Lucy couldn't let this continue. She had to find a way to protect Ella. That afternoon, Lucy decided to speak with Rose, the longtime housekeeper, hoping she might provide some insight. In the kitchen, Rose was preparing dinner, her kind face radiating concern as Lucy walked in. Rose, do you have a moment to talk? Lucy asked, sitting down at the kitchen table. Of course, ma'am. What's the matter? Rose paused her work and looked at Lucy with worry. Lucy hesitated for a moment before deciding to be direct. Have you noticed anything unusual when my father-in-law, Don Edward, comes over? I mean, the way he interacts with Ella. Rose's expression fell, and she sighed, setting down the knife she was holding. Mrs. Lucy, I've worked for this family a long time. When Samuel was a child, Mr. Edward was also very strict with him. In fact, I witnessed a few times when his punishments were far from fair. What do you mean? Lucy pressed, her heart pounding. Rose hesitated but then continued. Don Edward has always believed children need discipline to grow up properly. I remember once Samuel spilled a glass of water on the table, and Mr. Edward made him kneel for an entire evening. Other children in the family endured similar things. Many of them were so scared they wouldn't dare play when he was around. Lucy felt anger boiling in her chest. So, do you think he might be doing something to Ella now? I'm worried he's scaring her. Rose looked at Lucy with sad eyes. I don't know for sure, but Mrs. Lucy, if you suspect something, you need to protect Ella. I kept silent back then because I was afraid of losing my job, but looking back, I wish I had spoken up to protect those children. Lucy clenched her fists. Rose's words were a wake-up call, urging her to take action. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. Lucy's recount of her conversation with Rose brought back painful memories of his own childhood, memories he had tried to bury. They resurfaced like a flood, dragging him into a spiral of emotions. He remembered being forced to study until exhaustion and the harsh punishments for minor mistakes. Once, he had broken a plate while washing dishes and was made to stand outside in the freezing winter night as punishment. Don Edward didn't see it as abuse but as teaching. Yet for Samuel, they were emotional scars that never healed. He sat up, looking at Lucy holding Ella as she slept. The sight filled him with resolve. He couldn't let his daughter endure a childhood like his. The next day, Don Edward visited again. With his usual commanding presence and cold gaze, he settled into the armchair in the living room, his eyes scanning the room before landing on Ella. "Ella, come here to your grandfather," Don Edward ordered. Ella immediately backed away, hiding behind Lucy and clutching her mother's skirt. "No. I don't want to," she cried, tears streaming down her face. Don Edward frowned and stood, moving toward Ella. But this time, Lucy stepped between him and her daughter. "Father, please don't force her. She's just a child." Don Edward raised an eyebrow, his expression filled with indignation. "Lucy, you've spoiled her. Don't you understand that children need discipline?" Lucy didn't back down. "Discipline doesn't mean making her afraid, Father. What you're doing is hurting her." Samuel entered the room and stood beside his wife. "Father, we need to talk. We don't want Ella growing up in fear." Don Edward turned to Samuel, his eyes blazing with anger. "You're opposing me, Samuel. Are you teaching your daughter to be this weak?" "No, I'm teaching her to grow up with love," Samuel replied, his voice calm but firm. "I've had enough, and I don't want Ella to suffer as I did." Don Edward was silent, his face red with anger. But this time, Samuel didn't flinch. He stood firm, a shield for his daughter. After this second confrontation with Don Edward, the tension in the household reached an all-time high. Ella became increasingly withdrawn and fearful whenever her grandfather was around. She stopped playing and laughing, clinging to her mother instead, her eyes wide with fear whenever she saw Don Edward's shadow. One afternoon, while Lucy was preparing dinner, Rose pulled her aside in the kitchen. "Mrs. Lucy, I don't think we can let this go on any longer," Rose said softly. Lucy turned to her, her eyes questioning. "What do you mean?" Rose lowered her voice and glanced around as if afraid someone might hear. "Yesterday, while I was in the garden, I overheard Mr. Edward yelling at Ella. I think he grabbed her hand tightly because I heard her scream right after." Lucy's heart clenched. "Are you sure, Rose? Did you see anything?" "No, I didn't see clearly, but I heard enough to know Ella was terrified," Rose said, her voice trembling. "You need to do something before things get worse." That night, Samuel and Lucy sat down for a serious discussion. Ella was asleep, but the stillness of the house did nothing to ease the tension in their hearts. "Lucy, I've been thinking a lot," Samuel began, his eyes heavy with worry. "I can't stay silent anymore. If Father is really doing something to Ella, we have to protect her." Lucy nodded, a glimmer of hope rising within her. "So, what do we do, Samuel? Confront him directly?" "No, talking won't be enough. Father will never admit to anything. I think the only way to find out the truth is to install cameras in the house," Samuel said firmly. Lucy was surprised at first but quickly realized it might be their only option. "If that's what it takes to protect Ella, then I agree." The next morning, while Don Edward was out, Samuel pretended to leave for work but instead went to a store to buy a hidden camera. He chose a discreet model that could be placed in the living room, where Don Edward often interacted with Ella. Lucy helped him set up the camera during lunch while Rose kept Ella occupied in her room. Samuel carefully adjusted the angle, ensuring everything would be recorded clearly. Once they finished, they sat down and exhaled deeply. "I hope this will give us the answers we need," Lucy said, holding Samuel's hand tightly. "I hope so too," Samuel replied, his eyes filled with determination. "If Father has done anything to hurt her, I won't forgive him." That afternoon, as usual, Don Edward arrived at the house. He walked in with his characteristic air of authority, unaware that every move he made was now being recorded. "Ella, come here to your grandfather," Don Edward said, his voice low but commanding. Ella immediately stepped back, her fearful eyes darting to her mother. "No, no," she whispered, her voice trembling. Lucy knelt down and spoke gently to her daughter. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here." Don Edward frowned and moved closer to Ella. "You've spoiled her too much, Lucy. A child this timid will never amount to anything." Lucy tightened her grip on Ella's hand, her voice steady as she replied. "Father, I think today you should let Ella be. She's not used to being pushed like this." Don Edward said nothing, but his eyes were full of judgment. He sat down, pulling a book from his jacket pocket, pretending to be indifferent. But just a few minutes later, he spoke again, his voice sharper this time. "Ella, come here. I don't have time to play games with you." Lucy opened her mouth to intervene, but Ella suddenly screamed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No. I don't want to. You hurt me." The room fell into silence. Samuel, who had been standing by the living room door, stepped forward, his expression darkening. "Father, I think you should stop," Samuel said, his voice low but resolute. "Ella is not a child for you to impose on as you did with me." Don Edward turned abruptly, glaring at Samuel. "What are you saying? Do you think I'm doing something to her?" "I don't know, but it's clear Ella is terrified of you," Samuel replied, his tone calm but firm. "I don't want this to continue. You need to let her be." Don Edward let out a cold scoff and stood up. "Who do you think you are to lecture me on how to raise my granddaughter? Without me, you'd be nothing." Lucy took Ella's hand and gently led her upstairs, leaving the two men facing each other in tense silence. That night, Samuel reviewed the first recording from the hidden camera. He opened his laptop, fast-forwarding through the footage until he stopped at the moment Don Edward approached Ella. The footage was crystal clear, Don Edward gripping Ella's hand tightly as she struggled, his face cold and his eyes filled with anger. "You need to learn to endure. Children who cry are weak," his voice boomed in the recording, making Samuel's blood boil. Lucy, standing beside him, covered her mouth to stifle her gasp. "Samuel, you see it now, don't you? We can't let this happen anymore." Samuel nodded, his expression hardening with fury. "Tomorrow, we confront him. I won't forgive this." The next morning, the house was filled with a heavy tension. Samuel sat in the living room, his eyes fixed on the laptop on the table. The video from the hidden camera was paused, showing the moment Don Edward grabbed Ella's hand and his harsh words echoed through the recording. Beside him, Lucy clutched his hand, her face etched with worry. "Samuel, what are you going to do today?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm going to face him. It's time he faces the consequences of his actions," Samuel said, his voice low but resolute. "Ella can't live in fear anymore." Lucy nodded, though unease gnawed at her. "I'll be here to support you. We'll protect Ella, no matter what." Right on time, Don Edward arrived, the sound of the heavy wooden door creaking open as he entered. He carried his usual commanding presence, his black cane tapping rhythmically on the tiled floor. "Where is Ella?" "I want to speak with her," he demanded, skipping any greetings. Lucy stepped forward, blocking the entrance to the living room. "Ella doesn't want to see you, Father. She's resting." Don Edward raised an eyebrow, his sharp gaze piercing through Lucy. "You again. Always shielding and coddling her. Don't you see you're harming her by doing this?" Lucy clenched her fists, but her voice remained calm. "Father, protecting my daughter is not harming her. What you're doing is what's causing her pain." Before Don Edward could reply, Samuel stepped out from the living room, carrying his laptop. "Father, we need to talk." Don Edward's face showed a flicker of irritation. Are you here to preach to me again? If so, spare me. I know what I'm doing. Samuel shook his head, placing the laptop on the table. I don't want to argue, Father. But there's something you need to see. He played the hidden camera footage, turning the screen so Don Edward could see it clearly. The images and sound played back unmistakably, Ella crying out, her tiny hands trying to pull away from her grandfather's firm grip, and Don Edward's cold, commanding voice. You need to learn to endure. Children who cry are weak. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Don Edward stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the screen. When the video ended, he turned to Samuel, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. This was your idea? You installed cameras in the house to spy on me? Don Edward roared, his voice filled with authority. Yes, I did, Samuel replied, his voice steady but unyielding. Because I needed to protect Ella. Don't you see that your actions are scaring her? Don't lecture me about protection. Don Edward shouted, his eyes blazing. I raised you to become the man you are today. Without me, you'd be nothing. Samuel clenched his fists, his voice dropping into a grim tone. Have you ever thought about what your methods left behind in me? The fear, the pressure, and the scars I had to hide throughout my childhood. Did you ever ask how I felt? Don Edward opened his mouth to respond, but Samuel didn't let him. And now you're doing the same to Ella. I won't let it happen. I won't let you hurt my daughter. Lucy, standing behind them, felt the heat of the confrontation between the two men. She brought Ella downstairs, gently placing her on the sofa. Ella, tell your dad what Grandpa did, she encouraged softly. Ella glanced around, her tear-filled eyes darting nervously. At first, she remained silent, but when Samuel knelt in front of her, holding her hands, she trembled and said. Grandpa hurt my hand, he grabbed it tight. I was scared. Her soft yet truthful words cut through the tense atmosphere like a blade. Samuel turned back to face his father, locking eyes with him. Did you hear that, Father? This is what she feels. This is why I can't stay silent. Don Edward, for once, seemed to falter. He took a step back, his face pale. But then he tried to regain his usual demeanor. Children always exaggerate things. Are you seriously taking the word of a child against me? Samuel stood up, his eyes burning with anger but also filled with determination. Yes, I will. Because I am Ella's father, and I will protect her at all costs. The confrontation ended in a heavy silence. Don Edward said nothing more as he walked out of the house, his wooden cane striking the floor with force, as if releasing his anger. Lucy held Ella tightly, while Samuel sank into the couch, his head in his hands. Did we do the right thing? Samuel asked, his voice choked. Lucy placed a hand on her husband's shoulder, squeezing it gently. Right or wrong doesn't matter, Samuel. What matters is that we stood up for our daughter. Samuel looked up, his eyes filled with emotion. I swear, Lucy. I will never let anyone hurt Ella again. Lucy nodded, a fierce sense of belief welling up inside her. They both knew this was just the beginning of a long battle, but they were ready to face whatever came their way to protect their family. After Don Edward left the house, silence returned to the room, but no one felt at ease. Samuel sat quietly on the couch, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. Ella sat on Lucy's lap, nestling into her mother's embrace for comfort. Lucy gently stroked her daughter's hair, her worried eyes fixed on her husband. Samuel, are you okay? She asked softly. Samuel nodded, though his eyes betrayed his inner turmoil. I'm fine, Lucy. But I need time to think. We have to decide our next steps carefully. The next morning, while Lucy took Ella to Clara's house to give her a temporary break from the tense atmosphere at home, Samuel spent the time reviewing all the footage captured by the hidden camera. Each second that passed only fueled his growing anger and helplessness. In another clip, he saw Don Edward not only gripping Ella's hand tightly but also shouting at her, making her burst into tears. "You think you can do anything if you don't learn to be strong? Crying won't get you anywhere." Don Edward's cold, harsh words echoed through the video, and Samuel's fists clenched, his nails digging into his palms. When Lucy returned home, Samuel was ready. He placed his hand on her shoulder, his gaze resolute. "We need to address this, Lucy. Not just for Ella, but for ourselves." Lucy nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "What do you plan to do, Samuel?" "We're going to confront him in front of the entire family. Everyone needs to know the truth. This is no longer just our problem." That afternoon, Samuel called the family together. In addition to Lucy and Ella, his brother Charles and Charles's wife, Elena, arrived. Rose was also present, sitting quietly in a corner, her eyes filled with visible concern. When everyone was gathered, Don Edward entered. He scanned the room, sensing the unusual atmosphere. "Why did you call everyone here? What's going on?" he asked, his tone stern. Samuel stood, his hand resting on the laptop that sat ready on the table. "Father, today I want everyone to see what you've done. This can no longer be kept hidden." Don Edward raised an eyebrow, his sharp eyes fixed on Samuel. "Are you accusing me again of some nonsense?" Without replying, Samuel played the video captured by the hidden camera. Once more, the images and sound filled the room, Don Edward gripping Ella's hand, his harsh voice berating her, and the sound of her sobbing. The room fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the audio from the video. Charles, who had remained silent until now, furrowed his brow and turned to their father. "Father, is this true? Did you really do this to your granddaughter?" Don Edward didn't respond immediately, but his face turned from pale to flushed with anger. "You're all siding with him, aren't you? This is just a childish exaggeration. I was only trying to teach her what's right." Lucy could no longer hold back. "Right? Do you think gripping a child's hand so tightly she screams is right? Do you think hurling insults and forcing her to comply is the best way to educate her?" Charles spoke up, his voice filled with frustration. "Father, our niece is only 3 years old. This is not how a grandfather should treat his grandchild. You need to understand that your actions are wrong." Don Edward let out a dry laugh, but it was filled with anger. "You think you're qualified to judge me? I raised you all, gave you everything you have. Without me, you'd be nothing." Samuel stepped forward, standing face to face with his father. "We're grateful for what you've done, Father. But that doesn't justify the harm you've caused. And now, I won't let you hurt Ella. It has to stop." The argument went on, but in the end, Don Edward couldn't deny the evidence. Without another word, he left the house, his expression a mixture of anger and defeat. Charles and Elena, though shaken, voiced their support for Samuel and Lucy in protecting Ella. That night, Samuel and Lucy sat together in the living room. Ella was peacefully asleep upstairs, her nightmares no longer disturbing her rest. "Samuel, how do you think this will end?" Lucy asked, her voice quiet but filled with concern. "I don't know, Lucy. But at least we've done what's right." "I don't regret standing up to him," Samuel replied, his eyes filled with determination. Lucy leaned her head on his shoulder, a sense of relief washing over her for the first time in days. Although they knew the journey wasn't over, they were confident they were on the right path. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the windows, Samuel and Lucy sat together at the dining table. The laptop with the video evidence rested on the table, and Samuel's phone lay beside it. Ella was still asleep, her face free of tension after a peaceful night. "Samuel, what do you think we should do today?" Lucy asked, her voice calm but filled with determination. "We have no other choice," Samuel replied, his eyes reflecting unwavering resolve. I'm going to call the police and report everything. Father needs to be held accountable. Lucy nodded. She knew this decision would likely escalate tensions within the family, but it was the only way to protect Ella. Are you sure? She asked one last time, ensuring they were both ready for what was to come. Samuel placed a hand gently on his wife's shoulder, his gaze both tender and firm. I'm sure. We're doing this not just for Ella, but to stop him from harming anyone else. Taking his phone, Samuel dialed the emergency number and waited for the line to connect. A professional, calm female voice answered on the other end. This is 911. How may I assist you? Hello, I need to report a serious case of child abuse, Samuel said, his voice steady but laced with emotion. I have clear evidence and need to meet with law enforcement to provide more information. The dispatcher asked him a few follow-up questions to confirm the details and advised him to remain at home. A police team would be dispatched to handle the situation. Samuel ended the call and turned to Lucy. They'll be here in 30 minutes. Lucy nodded, a mix of anxiety and hope welling up inside her. We need to get everything ready. Ella is still asleep, so I'll take her to Clara's house when the police arrive to keep her away from any stress. That's a good idea. I'll stay here to explain everything and hand over the video, Samuel said, gripping the laptop firmly, as if making a silent vow to protect his family. Right on time, a white police car pulled up in front of the house. Two officers stepped out, a middle-aged man with a stern demeanor and a younger woman with a friendlier appearance. They knocked on the door, and Samuel quickly let them in. Good morning. I'm Officer Alejandro, and this is my colleague, Officer Valeria, the man said, showing his badge. We received your report. May we come in? Of course, please come in, Samuel replied, leading them to the living room. Lucy, standing nearby, gave the officers a polite nod before taking Ella out of the house to avoid exposing her to any further tension. Once everyone was seated, Samuel began recounting the entire story, from Ella's unusual behavior to the alarming actions of Don Edward that he and Lucy had uncovered. He opened the laptop and played the video for the officers to review. Officer Alejandro frowned as he watched, while Valeria sighed softly, her expression empathetic. This is very clear evidence, Valeria said, looking at Samuel. This behavior is unacceptable. We'll begin an investigation immediately. What will you do next? Samuel asked, his voice filled with concern. We'll summon Don Edward for questioning, Alejandro said firmly. We'll also conduct a background check to see if there have been any other allegations against him. When Lucy returned home after leaving Ella with Clara, she found Samuel sitting with the officers, his face still tense. She approached and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Is everything okay? Samuel nodded, turning to look at his wife. They're starting the investigation. I've provided the video and all the necessary information. Valeria offered a reassuring smile. Don't worry, ma'am. We'll handle this case with the seriousness it deserves. However, we'll need statements from you and Rose, as she has witnessed some incidents. Lucy nodded. I'm willing to cooperate. As for Rose, I'll talk to her and convince her to help. The next day, Samuel, Lucy, and Rose went to the police station to give detailed statements. Rose seemed hesitant at first, but seeing the determination in Samuel and Lucy's eyes, she realized she could no longer stay silent. I've worked for this family for many years, Rose began, her voice trembling slightly. I've seen Mr. Edward be very strict with the children in the family. He always believed discipline was the only way to teach. But sometimes, he went too far. I think it's time the truth comes to light. Valeria listened carefully, taking notes and occasionally glancing up at Rose. What you're sharing is very important. You've done the right thing by standing with this family. As the group left the police station, Samuel felt a small sense of relief. While he knew the investigation could take time, he also recognized the progress they were making. Holding Lucy's hand as they stepped outside into the sunlight, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. "Lucy, I think we've taken the first step," Samuel said, his voice calmer than it had been in days. "We didn't stay silent, and that matters." Lucy smiled and tightened her grip on his hand. "That's right. Ella deserves to grow up in a safe and happy environment. I believe things will turn out okay." The following day, Don Edward received a summons from the police station. The news spread quickly throughout the family, creating a wave of shock and concern. Charles and Elena, Samuel's brother and sister-in-law, were stunned when they heard. "Do you think this is true?" Elena asked her husband as they drove to Samuel's house. Charles sighed, his expression heavy with concern. "If Samuel brought this to light, there must be a reason. I don't think my brother would act without a solid foundation." When they arrived at Samuel's house, they saw him and Lucy sitting in the living room with Rose. Ella was playing with a toy Clara had brought as a gift. Though the little girl's face looked brighter, there was still a hint of hesitation whenever her grandfather was mentioned. "Samuel, did you really do this?" Charles asked immediately upon entering, his voice laced with worry. Samuel nodded, his eyes resolute. "Yes, Charles. I had no other choice. We cannot stay silent when a child is being hurt." Elena sat down next to Lucy, her expression full of empathy. "Lucy, I understand how you feel. As mothers, all we want is to protect our children. But I'm afraid this could fracture the family." Lucy met Elena's gaze, her eyes filled with determination. "Elena, I understand. But the most important thing right now is Ella. I can't let her live in fear for another day." Meanwhile, at the police station, Don Edward sat in the interrogation room, facing officers Alejandro and Valeria. His expression remained composed, but his eyes betrayed a deep irritation. "Mr. Edward, we've received reports about your behavior toward your granddaughter Ella. We also have video evidence. Do you have anything to say?" Alejandro asked, his tone even but sharp. Don Edward straightened his back, his eyes flashing with pride. "I've done nothing wrong. This is just traditional discipline. You wouldn't understand." Valeria, who usually maintained a gentle demeanor, couldn't hide the firmness in her voice this time. "Mr. Edward, this isn't about parenting styles. This is about actions that have caused physical and emotional harm to a 3-year-old child. We need a clear answer from you." Don Edward remained silent, his fists clenched tightly. For the first time in his life, the man who had always prided himself on authority and control felt cornered. Back at Samuel's house, as the family discussed the situation, Samuel's phone rang. Seeing Officer Valeria's name on the screen, he quickly answered. "Hello, this is Samuel," he said, his voice tinged with tension. "Samuel, I'm calling to update you. We've questioned Mr. Edward. He denies all accusations and insists it's just his method of discipline," Valeria said on the other end. "He refuses to admit anything?" Samuel asked, his brow furrowing. "That's correct," Valeria replied, her tone lowering. "But the video evidence is very compelling. We'll continue investigating and reach out if we need further information." Samuel thanked her and turned back to face Lucy and Charles. "Father still denies everything. He claims it's all part of his way of teaching." Charles sighed, leaning back in his chair. "That's how he's always been. He never admits he's wrong, Samuel. But you're doing the right thing. Don't let this discourage you." That evening, after Ella had gone to bed, Samuel and Lucy sat together in the living room. Rose had gone home and Charles and Elena had left after a long day. "Samuel, how long do you think this will take?" Lucy asked gently, her voice tinged with worry. "I don't know, Lucy. But I believe the truth will come out." "Father can't avoid it forever," Samuel replied, placing his hand over hers to reassure her. Lucy rested her head on his shoulder, finding a moment of peace. Regardless of how this ends, I'm relieved to know we've done everything we can to protect Ella. She deserves a happy childhood." Samuel nodded, his expression firm. "Absolutely. From now on, I won't let anyone harm her." The next day, Clara visited the house to check on Lucy and Ella. Hearing the entire story, Clara couldn't hide her emotions. "Lucy, you've been incredibly brave. Not everyone would have the courage to stand up to someone like Don Edward." Lucy smiled and hugged Clara. "We didn't have a choice, Clara. I'm just doing what any mother would do." Clara looked over at Ella, who was playing with her daughter. "Ella looks happier now. She'll heal, Lucy. It just takes time and love." That night, as Samuel and Lucy were getting ready for bed, Samuel's phone rang again. This time, it was Alejandro. "Samuel, I wanted to inform you that we've just received another complaint from a different family member. It seems Mr. Edwards' behavior wasn't limited to Ella. There are allegations of harm to other children in the past," Alejandro said. Samuel sat up straight, his heart racing. "Thank you, Alejandro. This is incredibly important. I'll do whatever I can to help." Hanging up, Samuel turned to Lucy. "This isn't over yet, but I think justice is getting closer." Charles sighed, his expression heavy with concern. "If Samuel brought this to light, there must be a reason. I don't think my brother would act without a solid foundation." When they arrived at Samuel's house, they saw him and Lucy sitting in the living room with Rose. Ella was playing with a toy Clara had brought as a gift. Though the little girl's face looked brighter, there was still a hint of hesitation whenever her grandfather was mentioned. "Samuel, did you really do this?" Charles asked immediately upon entering, his voice laced with worry. Samuel nodded, his eyes resolute. "Yes, Charles. I had no other choice. We cannot stay silent when a child is being hurt." Elena sat down next to Lucy, her expression full of empathy. "Lucy, I understand how you feel. As mothers, all we want is to protect our children. But I'm afraid this could fracture the family." Lucy met Elena's gaze, her eyes filled with determination. "Elena, I understand. But the most important thing right now is Ella. I can't let her live in fear for another day." Meanwhile, at the police station, Don Edward sat in the interrogation room, facing officers Alejandro and Valeria. His expression remained composed, but his eyes betrayed a deep irritation. "Mr. Edward, we've received reports about your behavior toward your granddaughter Ella. We also have video evidence. Do you have anything to say?" Alejandro asked, his tone even but sharp. Don Edward straightened his back, his eyes flashing with pride. "I've done nothing wrong. This is just traditional discipline. You wouldn't understand." Valeria, who usually maintained a gentle demeanor, couldn't hide the firmness in her voice this time. "Mr. Edward, this isn't about parenting styles. This is about actions that have caused physical and emotional harm to a 3-year-old child. We need a clear answer from you." Don Edward remained silent, his fists clenched tightly. For the first time in his life, the man who had always prided himself on authority and control felt cornered. Back at Samuel's house, as the family discussed the situation, Samuel's phone rang. Seeing Officer Valeria's name on the screen, he quickly answered. "Hello, this is Samuel," he said, his voice tinged with tension. "Samuel, I'm calling to update you. We've questioned Mr. Edward. He denies all accusations and insists it's just his method of discipline," Valeria said on the other end. "He refuses to admit anything?" Samuel asked, his brow furrowing. "That's correct," Valeria replied, her tone lowering. "But the video evidence is very compelling. We'll continue investigating and reach out if we need further information." Samuel thanked her and turned back to face Lucy and Charles. "Father still denies everything. He claims it's all part of his way of teaching." Charles sighed, leaning back in his chair. That's how he's always been. He never admits he's wrong, Samuel. But you're doing the right thing. Don't let this discourage you. That evening, after Ella had gone to bed, Samuel and Lucy sat together in the living room. Rose had gone home and Charles and Elena had left after a long day. Samuel, how long do you think this will take? Lucy asked gently, her voice tinged with worry. I don't know, Lucy. But I believe the truth will come out. Father can't avoid it forever, Samuel replied, placing his hand over hers to reassure her. Lucy rested her head on his shoulder, finding a moment of peace. Regardless of how this ends, I'm relieved to know we've done everything we can to protect Ella. She deserves a happy childhood. Samuel nodded, his expression firm. Absolutely. From now on, I won't let anyone harm her. The next day, Clara visited the house to check on Lucy and Ella. Hearing the entire story, Clara couldn't hide her emotions. Lucy, you've been incredibly brave. Not everyone would have the courage to stand up to someone like Don Edward. Lucy smiled and hugged Clara. We didn't have a choice, Clara. I'm just doing what any mother would do. Clara looked over at Ella, who was playing with her daughter. Ella looks happier now. She'll heal, Lucy. It just takes time and love. That night, as Samuel and Lucy were getting ready for bed, Samuel's phone rang again. This time, it was Alejandro. Samuel, I wanted to inform you that we've just received another complaint from a different family member. It seems Mr. Edwards' behavior wasn't limited to Ella, there are allegations of harm to other children in the past, Alejandro said. Samuel sat up straight, his heart racing. Thank you, Alejandro. This is incredibly important. I'll do whatever I can to help. Hanging up, Samuel turned to Lucy. This isn't over yet, but I think justice is getting closer. Lucy smiled, though her heart was still heavy with worry. Yet, a glimmer of hope began to shine in their lives. The next morning, Samuel and Lucy received a call from the police station requesting their presence for an update on the case. After leaving Ella with Clara, they drove to the station, emotions swirling, both anxious and hopeful. At the station, they were led into a small conference room where officers Alejandro and Valeria were waiting. Alejandro spoke, his tone calm yet firm. We have gathered enough evidence to take Mr. Edward to court. In addition to the video you provided, we've also received testimonies from other family members. Lucy's eyes widened in surprise. Other family members? Who? Valeria offered a soft smile as she answered. One of them is Mr. Edward's eldest granddaughter, Gabriella. She came forward to share her own experiences of similar treatment when she was younger. She decided to speak up after learning what Ella had been through. Samuel gripped Lucy's hand tightly, his eyes filled with emotion. This is what we hoped for. The truth is coming to light. Alejandro nodded and continued. We're finalizing the case file and will submit it to the court in the coming days. But this isn't just about the legal process. It's an opportunity for your family to confront the past and rebuild trust. Lucy felt a weight lift slightly from her shoulders. Thank you for working tirelessly to help our family. This means so much to us. Valeria smiled warmly, her sincerity evident. It's our duty. And I believe that with love and determination, your family will overcome this. Returning home, Samuel and Lucy sat in the living room, reflecting on what they had just learned. What do you think we should do next? Lucy asked, her voice soft. We need to talk to the rest of the family. This is no longer just our issue, Samuel said, his expression thoughtful. That evening, Samuel called Charles, Elena, and Gabriella to invite them over to discuss the situation. When Gabriella arrived, she glanced around the living room, her emotions evident. Gabriella, it was very brave of you to speak up, Samuel said, pulling out a chair for her. Gabriella offered a faint smile, her gaze settling on Ella, who was playing in a corner. I couldn't stay silent anymore, Samuel. When I learned what Ella had endured, I knew I had to do something. Charles placed a reassuring hand on Gabriella's shoulder, his voice calm. You did the right thing. Now is the time for our family to come together to protect the children. In the days that followed, the family began taking steps to heal. Ella was taken to a child psychologist, who worked with her gently and patiently. Lucy sat beside her during the sessions, holding her daughter's hand as if to give her strength. Ella is a bright and sensitive child, the psychologist said after the first session. With your love and patience, she will recover from this. Lucy felt a spark of hope. We'll do whatever it takes to help Ella heal and live a happy life. Meanwhile, Samuel focused on addressing unresolved issues within the family. He took the initiative to meet with Don Edward at his home, where the older man now lived in apparent isolation. The allegations and estrangement from the family had taken a toll on him. Father, I didn't come here to accuse you again, Samuel began, his voice calm. I came because I want you to understand the impact your actions have had on this family. Don Edward looked at his son, his eyes tired and weary in a way Samuel had never seen before. Samuel, I did everything for you. I never thought I was wrong. Father, love isn't about control or coercion. Love is about understanding and protecting. You made mistakes, but it's not too late to make things right, Samuel said, his voice filled with sincerity. Don Edward stayed silent, his head bowed as though deep in thought. For the first time, he didn't argue against his son's words. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere in the family grew warmer. Ella gradually regained her radiant smile. She ran around the house, laughing and playing with her friends, no longer burdened by fear. Lucy and Samuel felt as though a tremendous weight had been lifted from their shoulders. One afternoon, while Ella was playing in the garden, Samuel sat beside Lucy on a stone bench. He held her hand, his gaze filled with contentment. Lucy, we've done it. Ella is healing, and our family is moving forward. Lucy smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. That's right, Samuel. The most important thing is that we didn't stay silent. Love has carried us through it all. The story culminated in a large family gathering. Charles, Elena, Gabriella, and other relatives came to Samuel's house to celebrate Ella's recovery and the newfound unity within the family. Don Edward also attended, but this time, he carried himself differently. The arrogance and coldness he once exuded were gone. As the celebration neared its end, Don Edward stood up and addressed the room. I've thought about this deeply, he began, his voice hoarse with emotion. I was wrong, and I want to apologize to all of you, especially to Ella. The room fell silent until Gabriella stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. Thank you, Grandpa. As long as you understand and change, we're still a family. Samuel and Lucy exchanged a glance, their eyes filled with peace and satisfaction. Love had triumphed, bringing hope and healing to everyone involved. This story conveys a profound lesson about love and protection, as Samuel and Lucy prioritized Ella's safety above all family pressures. It encourages courage in standing up against injustice, even when it means confronting one's own kin. The repercussions of Don Edward's harsh methods underscore the importance of empathy and love in raising children. The unity demonstrated by Gabriella and Charles shows that families can overcome adversity when they stand together. Ultimately, the remorse and forgiveness opened the door to healing, allowing trust and familial bonds to be rebuilt.